Hey, what's up? Welcome back to another edition of the Mandatory Live. Thank you so much for rocking with us. If you like the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Also, follow us on our social media channels. We're at the Mandatory TKO. Lots to get into, of course. If you saw our cover photo, then you know that we are going to preview I think one of the most anticipated fights of this year and might go down as the fight of the year. David Benavidez and David Morrell, the battle of the Morrells. The card is absolutely stellar as well. We are going to get into the undercard as well. For a minute, Diego Pacheco took care of Steven Nelson. And I thought it was a good performance by him. Brian and I were texting throughout the fight. And now it kind of makes the super middleweight division pretty interesting because there's other names in this division, particularly one Brian's fellow Puerto Rican Jake Paul. No, I'm just joking. Not Jake Paul, Edgar Berlanga. There's conversation now that Diego Pacheco and Edgar Berlanga could possibly meet and have a fight at super middleweight, and the conversation of Jaime Munguia is out the door. This is the fight now to make for super middleweight. Brian, your thoughts though on Diego Pacheco's performance on beating Nelson and possibly fighting Edgar Berlanga?
Pretty much what I expected. I forgot to bet on this fight, actually. It was just one of them days that I just wasn't placing any bets. But I would have bet Pacheco by decision. I didn't think he was going to knock out Steven Nelson. It's really testament to Steven Nelson and his toughness. But he just got outclassed. Like this is just a different level. I thought 9-3 scorecards were great. 117, 111, fairly scored. Diego Pacheco looks like he's going to contend for a title very soon. This is something that we've been talking about, that we've been waiting for in terms of impact on the super middleweight division. We've been talking about Jaime Munguia versus Edgar Berlanga a lot. And if Jaime Munguia gets vengeance against Bruno Sarase, then maybe that's something that could still materialize. But Diego Pacheco is sort of next up. And I'm excited about him. I think, he was tested in this fight. Like the 9-3 scorecards may not fully reflect some of the things Steven Nelson did well in terms of getting to Diego Pacheco and hitting him, getting out of the way of that jab and just knocking him with hooks or whatever the case may be. But it was few and far between. Like Diego Pacheco was busier. His jab looked really, really good. And he showed a different level of boxing. Whereas, he's come up and he's got power and he's knocked out a whole bunch of his opponents. Like the majority of his opponents, he stopped. But to showcase that versatility, I thought was very important. He did it against a good fighter. He has a couple of the sort of step-up titles, a WBO International and a WBA USA, a WBC USA, rather. That doesn't mean a whole lot to people. And, the viability of those titles kind of depends on who has it. But ultimately, what it should signal for at least Diego Pacheco, who has a healthy promotional deal, obviously, is that, he's in line for a title shot at some point soon. It might not be his next fight, but I would expect by the end of the year, if not very early next year, that we're talking about him potentially fighting for a title because he's also ranked high in some of the sanctioning bodies. So,
Yeah, I think for Diego Pacheco, there's so much talk about who he's going to fight next. I still want to see some other names on his resume because I think, of course, the fight with him and Edgar Berlanga, that's a very interesting fight. But I think Edgar Berlanga has to fight someone else after Canelo. And we could possibly get this Diego Pacheco and Edgar Berlanga fight maybe late in the year, Brian. I think that could be a possibility at super middleweight, depending on who Diego Pacheco fights. And also, this is a money fight. Like, this is a fight that they could do, and it would be, it would still be because Diego Pacheco is a Mexican American, but it's also the rivalry, Puerto Rico, Mexico, East Coast, West Coast. Diego Pacheco's from South Central. And as you know, Edgar Berlanga is from New York. You know what part of New York is he from?
Brooklyn.
Okay, Brooklyn.
Like he's from Brooklyn originally, and he did some measure of training in the Bronx. Because I remember when we were interviewing him for La Cultura, which is a documentary that we did on Backpack Broadcasting. For people who don't know, I've referenced it. Some of the trophies and shit behind me are from that documentary. Edgar Berlanga was part of that. And we went to meet with him in the Bronx at some point. That card was actually in Brooklyn. So he's originally from Brooklyn. I believe he's living and training out of Florida for the most part now, but there's obviously still in New York a lot. Just want to go back to this point about Diego Pacheco. Before this fight, was ranked number 1 by the WBO in this division. So obviously Canelo Alvarez has that title right now. Number 3 by the WBC and number 6 by the IBF. So that gives you an indication that he could be in a mandatory spot for that WBO title. But we're, heading down the road of potentially Canelo versus Crawford. So we don't really know. Like, that's gonna kind of hold up the division. So is there going to be an interim title situation or whatever? Like, I think that's what we're gonna have to wait for.
All right. So I think the next question, Bryan, is if Edgar Berlanga and Diego Pacheco were to fight, who would win this fight between them? And by the way, y'all, drop your comments. We want to know who you think would win this fight. Are you rocking with Berlanga or are you rocking with Pacheco?
And I can't see how Edgar Berlanga looks in his next fight, which will undoubtedly not be against Diego Pacheco. um, I feel like Diego Pacheco is going to give him some problems, but I do wonder. Like, look, Edgar Berlanga has power, and fighting Canelo is one thing. Can he sort of get to Diego Pacheco? Is sort of the question here. I kind of think that the boxing ability and the jab that Diego Pacheco displayed is how he would fight against Edgar Berlanga. So I have questions about how Edgar Berlanga could close that gap. I would give a slight tilt to Berlanga based on the experience, what we've seen so far. I don't know how Diego Pacheco fares against Canelo Alvarez right now. I just kind of want to see more of him. And I think with Edgar Berlanga, like, he still does have that power. It's a very close one for me though, Chantel. Like, that's a legit 50-50-ish fight. And I would like to see if Edgar Berlanga, like, what kind of challenge is he going to have in his return fight, which appears to be coming up. We just don't know the opponent for sure yet. Like, there's been rumors about Gabriel Rosado. He's going to fight this person, that person. Like, I think Caleb Plant is somebody who he's not going to fight yet, but will be in this mix of names that we talk about. William Skull has the IBF title. Nobody seems too interested in mentioning him, but he has a championship right now. So I think there's a lot of interesting things in this division. And we got one comment that, from Nerd, who says the next super fight at 168 in a couple years could be Pacheco versus Iglesias. And I mentioned Osles Iglesias up here because he had a hell of a knockout last year. And he's a guy that if you told me, all right, he's actually going to be the best one of this group, I'd listen because Iglesias also looks really good. I want these dudes to fight each other. Like, there's enough for, honestly, a tournament here at super middleweight. There's legitimately enough to whether it's a World Boxing Super Series or the Super Six, which I believe was originally at super middleweight. Like, there's a lot you can do in this division. So I hope that we get those fights this year because there are a lot of interesting names who have flaws, who are also great, who can probably beat the shit out of each other.
Yeah, I think this is a fight that would be similar to David Benavidez and David Morrell. Like, if we were to get this fight early, that's how exciting this fight would be. And I think it would be a moneymaker. And I think these guys would bring it. I think Diego Pacheco is an absolute superstar. And we're going to be talking about him for a very long time. As for Edgar Berlanga, I think he's already kind of solidified himself as being a boxing superstar. And it's only going to get better if he continues to win. Like, I think a lot of people are sleeping on the fact that Edgar Berlanga has that star power that's similar to Money May. Like, let's be serious here. Like, he has the potential to be that big if he's that good.
Well,
Like,
that's the
if
problem. It's like he's not that good. Like that.
but we don't know
This is
that.
the.
But
I
we
get.
don't know that
I get.
because he has gotten better and he has the Canelo L. Just like when Canelo was coming up, he had the Mayweather L. And I'm not comparing
You kind of
Berlanga
are.
to Canelo. I'm just saying in the terms of like superstardom because not every boxer has that.
The problem is I don't think he's going to win enough to get that. That's the thing. Like
Probably not.
he clearly
Probably
has
not.
more flaws.
But here's the thing, it's like in boxing when you think about people that are fans, like just fans, not people that are like obsessed with the sport like us or like watch nerdy
Sure.
fights, they are I don't know. I guess they're just like they love the glitz and the glamour, and they just like people's like how wavy they are and how they
Yeah,
dress and like who they rock with. Like people like people for that as well. And Berlanga has all of those things. You know
he's
what
a
I
big
mean? Like
name.
Fat Joe almost got in a fight with Caleb Plant. Okay,
Yeah.
these are the type of stories that come out of Edgar Berlanga's camp and like when he's fighting. I just think when it comes to superstardom, he has that already, and it's like if he continues to win and he starts knocking out people yo, this guy's gonna continue to grow. Now, when it comes to him fighting Diego Pacheco, I think Diego Pacheco would stalk him in the ring a little bit more. His size would be an advantage. I think Diego Pacheco has a better jab. I think Edgar Berlanga definitely has the power, and he could cause some problems for Pacheco because Pacheco's defense is pretty bad. So I think Berlanga would be catching him. And I don't think Berlanga is going to be scared to throw at him either, but Pacheco's got real power. When it comes to skill, I give that to Pacheco. I think he has a higher IQ. I obviously, like, you know where I'm going with this. I've been saying this for a minute. I think Pacheco would win. And I
Yeah.
also think Pacheco could knock him out. Like, I think Pacheco could knock him out in rounds 9 through 12.
I need to see how Berlanga looks coming off the Canelo fight because I think we've bordered on, and this is a fellow Puerto Rican from New York saying this. I think we're bordering on giving him too much credit for how he looked in the Canelo fight because I think really Canelo is probably a little bit closer to or is past his prime. Like he's still really, really good and past his prime is still elite, pound for pound, best in his division, all those different things. But at the same time, a younger, even slightly younger version of him probably stops Edgar Berlanga. Now, if Edgar Berlanga actually like mows through his next couple of opponents, then we have a different discussion about Caleb Plant, who's the last guy that Canelo Alvarez like really stopped. And Caleb Plant did look good in that fight, but still was stopped late. And a lot of people then expected Dave Benavidez, who we've been talking about, to do the same thing. He did not do that. Caleb Plant actually looked good in that fight as well. So I think these dudes got to fight each other at some point. Whether it's Diego Pacheco, you have Edgar Berlanga, you have Caleb Plant, you have Osles Iglesias, you have William Skull, you have Jaime Munguia still, if he could beat Bruno Sarase, which if he loses again to Bruno Sarase, then pack it up. I don't know what else you can do here. And also, we got to mention Christian Mbili because Christian Mbili is just out here on a top ranked deal, #1 in the WBA, #1 WBC, #2 in the WBO because shout out to Top Rank, and #3 to the in the IBF. Like Christian Mbili should also be mentioned here. And if you did a tournament of super middleweight, which I'm borderline about a book right now, like fantasy book right now to tell you who's gonna fight who's gonna do this. I have no idea who wins. I have no idea.
It's a fight that we all want to see. Let us know who you would think would win against Diego Pacheco and Edgar Berlanga. Who are you rocking with? Drop your comments below.